Hey everyone, I'm Ryan, the host of the Roast West Coast Coffee podcast. I host the show on Anchor by Spotify. If you haven't heard of it, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything that you need all in one place. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. I host on Anchor because it distributes my podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many more, making it easier for me to spend my time interviewing guests and drinking coffee. Anchor is everything you need to make a podcast all in one place, and best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. And I'm using the old crappy headphones today.
I said, we're using the laptop speakers, so that's even more awesome.
You know, honestly, for whatever nice new equipment I've had or I've had guests have, it ends up being like the person with like the Apple laptop mic and, you know, sitting outside next to the road sounds the best. Like there's, I think this is all a scam.
Yeah.
But I'm having one of those days. This thing is like, I literally taped it together this morning because the new headphones that I had, of course, shit the bed. So excuse my language.
Yeah. We're all fine with language here.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 15 of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast. I'm Ryan Wolt, and this is the show where I often wait briefly for the motorcycle to pass by and then bring you the stories of coffee professionals, entrepreneurship, and coffee education. Today, I'm chatting with Christopher Owens and Doug Meils. They're the entire team of Right Quick Roasters in Los Angeles. Right Quick is a young roaster in the industry in business entity only. Christopher and Doug have already made names for themselves in the coffee industry and have a history of collaborating. Their resumes are littered with well-regarded coffee names like Intelligentsia, Handsome Coffee Roasters, and Coffee Bar LA, to name a few. I met Christopher and Doug at Coffee Fest LA, where they were kind enough to give me a sample of one of their recent roasts. During the upcoming episode, they mention a Honduras that they're particularly proud of, and while I'd normally give you that detail at the end of the show, they also mention that they have a very limited supply, one burlap coffee sack's worth to be exact, so I wanted you to be able to jump online and order while you're listening today. Shop for that coffee and others on rightquick.la. You can go directly to that link or detour through roastwestcoast.com, where you'll find that link in this week's newsletter. Not to mention so much more. This morning, I've brought my coffee thermos out to the beach. The waves are rolling in, and I'm imbued with a sense of calm, because I know it's all good and it's gonna all be alright, as long as there's coffee in this mug. Now is the time to double check your own coffee mug. Make sure there is more than just one last sip, and settle in for this interview with Doug Meils and Christopher Owens of Right Quick Coffee Roasters in Los Angeles, California, on the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast. Let's see. You guys have coffee over there today?
I was drinking this morning our Ethiopia Chef that we have. But currently, right at this moment, I am not drinking any coffee.
I really enjoyed the coffee you guys were giving out at the Coffee Fest where we met. It was the Honduras.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I reached out again right after that. So I would say welcome to the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast, guys. I appreciate you being here. If you would, for me and for the audience, just let me know your name so that people can identify your voice and maybe what your role is at Right Quick Coffee Roasters.
I'm Christopher Owens, and I guess my role is Director of Coffee / Founder at Right Quick Roasters.
And I'm Doug Meils, and Head Roaster, and like sort of founder.
And then we do everything else.
Yeah.
So it's just the two of us, so we do all the jobs.
But you're not strangers to coffee. This isn't like your first job in coffee. So just to kind of build up a little bit of history, I'm wondering if you could just share with us what you'd been doing in coffee before this, before Right Quick came about. And if you wouldn't mind confirming, just how long has Right Quick been around? How long has this been marinating and in business?
Well, probably mid-pandemic is when we really started it. The idea had sort of been rolling around for a little while before that because we also are part of a company called Las Lilas Coffee. I met a gentleman named George Pope, whose family's had a coffee farm in El Salvador in the San Miguel region since 1850, 1851. And he approached me to create a roasted brand to basically to make the farm economically viable. They were struggling. He wanted to save the family farm history, and so we had been working on that. But avenues are tough when you only have one origin to sell. So that was when we decided we wanted to keep the family brand and keep that intact and not sort of detract from it. So we decided, let's start this other mark to have a more full menu offering and have two different avenues to explore in terms of what customers want and need. We have a catalog that we can give them.
Roasting the same coffee for like a year was really boring for me. So I pushed it. It was like he had the idea and had it kicking around in his head, and I was like, please, please, I would like to roast. I mean, if you just roast one origin all the time, it's going to get boring no matter what origin it is. For me, at least.
Sure. I mean, I have a lot of regular listeners, but for new listeners, kind of that coffee, roasting coffee is like a production. It's like a factory line to some extent. I think there's this kind of magical aura around it from maybe the outside, but there's a lot of just physical, repetitive, you dial in your coffee and that's fun, but then I've got to create the same consistent over time.
Yeah.
I'll tie it back to then, like, what is your coffee history before Las Lilas and before Right Quick? Where were you guys at in the coffee world?
Well, I've worked. I guess I started, quote unquote, for real in coffee in 2004 at a company called Gimme Coffee out of New York. They had just opened their Williamsburg location, which I believe is no longer there. And I started working there with my friend Mike White and left New York, moved to Atlanta, worked for Counterculture Coffee, left Atlanta, moved to San Francisco, worked for Richwell Coffee Roasters, and that's where I started roasting. Before that, I was barista and customer relations, that kind of thing. And then left San Francisco to move to LA and helped open Intelligentsia's Venice location and worked at Venice and then worked in Pasadena. And then left that to found Handsome Coffee Roasters with Mike Phillips and Tyler Wells. And then we sold Handsome, and I took some time off, and that's when I met George. And then now we're back.
Yeah, for me, I quote unquote got like a real coffee job in 2007 at a place called Mix in Ashland, Oregon, where I went to college. And they were a Stumptown account and had their coffee. And it was my first time having quote unquote real coffee. Blew my mind. Worked there for a few years, became manager, left, and went to Seattle. Had a little bit of a coffee break. Went down to LA, down here, and applied at Intelligentsia Silver Lake every day for a few weeks until they got annoyed and hired me. They transferred me to Pasadena, where Chris and I opened Intelligentsia Pasadena together. That's where we met. I think it was a pretty instant, like, oh, we're friends.
Yeah.
That was 2010, maybe early 2011, late 2010.
Yeah, 2010.
Worked there for a bit, opened Coffee Bar LA, ran that, which was the exact opposite of Intelligentsia. I only hired my friends, and we really pushed the limits on having a good time. And that's when Chris founded Handsome with Mike and Tyler, and I put my notice in at Coffee Bar and gave him a call and said, I'm a free agent. Chris took me out to lunch and said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to try roasting. And he said, okay, which immediately made me scared. Started roasting at Handsome, did that for a while, went back to Seattle, had a barista job at Togo Coffee with Brian Wells. To be honest, just partied for a few years after a couple of intense jobs with Handsome and Intelli. Came back down here and worked at what was then called Take Flight, and was the head roaster there. Take Flight had to change the name to Tectonic. They're currently running as Tectonic, and head roaster for Tectonic for a while. Left there, and I had met George by that point, and the writing was a little bit on the wall that I would work for them at some point, or with them. Started roasting for Las Lilas, and then the idea kicked around for Right Quick.
Sure. Two follow-ups on that. One is we may have crossed paths before, because I used to go to that Pasadena Intelligentsia in like early 2011 when we first moved to LA. I lived right up in Altadena down the road.
For sure, man.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember. I believe we left, Tyler and I left, because I think we formally announced Handsome 2011 at, I believe it was 2011. Yeah, 2011 at SCA Houston. I believe that was Houston. And so whatever that sort of spring, summer, I forget when it was, would have been when we were done at Pasadena.
Yeah, it's always a small world. I'm always amazed at the connections people have, not just in coffee, but always. The second thought I have just for the audience is, I don't know this yet. I'm going to Google it. You guys might know, but we don't have to get into it. But if Take Flight had to change their name because of Michael Jordan, I think that's phenomenal. That's almost better.
I can't really speak for sure, but I don't think so.
No, I know why they had to change their name, and I think I have one more year left on that NDA where I can start talking shit.
Well, I think it's interesting. You both have had kind of West Coast and East Coast industry experience, at least a little bit. Do you see differences in those two coffee worlds? I mean, obviously you're ingratiated in one side of things now, so there's some recency bias. But I started in the Midwest. My first cup of coffee was in Chicago, and then I moved to New York, and then I came to the West Coast, and the vibe was always certainly different. But I wasn't in the industry, so I'm wondering from your perspective if there is a difference kind of between those two. If it's like the rap wars, if it's like East Coast, West Coast sports, any reflections on that?
I think every scene or location or community inherently thinks their stuff is the best. So you're going to get that sort of ego no matter where you go. I think it's been so long since I was in New York that it's hard to comment now, because so much has happened since then. And I think to that point, for me, when I was working, it felt very lonely. There was only Gimme, 9th Street Espresso, and Joe when I started that were doing, quote unquote good coffee. I'm sure there are some other shops that will take offense to that, but even Cafe Grumpy hadn't opened yet. And so I was only getting my exposure in my community online, essentially, in the early days of a forum called Coffeed, or, that kind of thing. And then, so that's sort of spurred me to, I wanted to get better. I wanted to understand coffee, and I didn't feel like there was a way I could do it locally. So I actually ended up reaching out to the 2005 World Barista Champion, Tim Wendelboe. 4, 5. I can't remember exactly. I think 5. Forgive me, Tim. Anyway, I reached out to him to just do some training, and myself and my boss, the owner of Gimme at the time, Kevin Cutterback, we took a trip to Norway, and I did a training for a week with Tim and in the roastery at Solberg and Hansen, and like barista training and just that whole thing. And it was really illuminating and great, but it just touches on, like, I didn't know where to go to be better, because there wasn't a community really at the time. And I think there is now. I think there's a lot of people doing events. And I think that's true largely. It was a much different landscape in the mid 2000s.
How did you reach out to him? Did you like slide into his MySpace DMs, or like how did that?
I think I just emailed him.
That is something really different in our current time period, where if I want an answer about something in coffee, I mean, I play the coffee idiot on the show when we do education stuff, which is fairly accurate. But if I want an answer to something like about tamping or about espresso or about whatever, I can go on Instagram or YouTube and find out instantly. I think that's great because I have access to that information, but you actually were kind of forced to kind of find someone and go there, go cross the ocean. I almost wonder if that is better because it allows you to know that you're serious. I mean, I can dabble in a million different ideas at any given moment now, but I
Sure.
used to have to work harder to get the information I wanted, which is how I knew I cared.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some truth to that. I think, like you said, the access to information now is phenomenal. Like what you can learn and from whom you can learn is amazing. But there are some downsides to that. I mean, it's an experience that the trip to Norway is an experience I will always treasure and look fondly on. Like I think it was a great time, and it was really, it's hard to, as the jaded old man in coffee now, put myself back in that like young, excited barista mindset, like where everything, I don't know, everything mattered, everything was monumental, and everything was exciting. And in certain ways, that's unfortunate, but in other ways, it's great that I got to do that, because I think sort of to that point, like now you can, you can watch any number of coffee professionals doing what they do on YouTube or wherever, and get the information, but you do it in a vacuum, in a way. Like you don't have, I don't know. I'm not eloquent enough to sort of formulate my point, but it's like you're part of the community, but disconnected from it at the same time.
Sure. And that's something I actually hear from a lot of guests, especially new roasters or new coffee businesses. I do hear that they feel lonely, that they learned everything on their own and they
Right.
didn't have a give and take with somebody or a network that they built up during the learning process. This show is actually in the top 10 of entrepreneur podcasts in Norway, so you might have some fans over there.
Yeah,
I
hopefully.
just found that out.
It's been a long time since I was there, so I don't know who's going to remember me, if anybody.
Yeah,
But
it's not in the top 10 in America, but over there,
hey,
we're doing all right.
making the top 10 is making the top 10. You can count it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Like that sort of idea. Like, we were doing it the Solberg and Hansen Roastery, and that was like the first time I saw they had I don't know what they have now, but two 120 kilo probots sitting next to each other, and I was like, wow, cupping in their lab with all these. I think Tim had also just won the World Cup Tasters Championship, because it was like the really early days of that. So I'm like, this is my first time at a professional cupping, and I'm cupping with all these professionals, and that was intimidating. But you do it because you want to learn, and I told myself in that moment, I was like, I'm gonna do it all, and I'm gonna ask the questions because I want to learn. If it's a stupid question, well, I still needed the answer. And in that whole adage, there are no stupid questions, it's like there are just questions you don't know, and just ask them, because at the end of the day, you have to learn somewhere. Don't be afraid to find out. I think for me, the problem comes when people feel like they know it all.
Mm-hmm.
You've closed yourself off. You're not going to learn anymore, and no one's going to want to tell you anything, because you're just like, well, I know, I have it all figured out.
And that just like, it doesn't foster growth when you're like, oh, I know everything. And I've worked at jobs where I've worked for people who quote unquote know everything. We say quote unquote a lot. And it's like, okay, well, I find myself like not bringing ideas to the table anymore, and it gets stagnant, gets boring, and then you don't want to work there anymore. You get unhappy. So like Chris and I think really since we met, we've been really, really good at being like, hey, that's a dumb idea, but let's go get a drink still. Like, or that's a great idea, or you did great. It's very easy to share and be either vulnerable or like, hey, I have this idea, and be like, Doug, that's not going to work.
And I think we check in with each other also. You know, we've been in the industry a long time. We, you know, have egos and we have whatever, and so we keep checking in with each other and saying, hey, whatever I say about this roast or this coffee or this packaging or whatever it is we're talking about in business or even in our personal lives, it's in service of making it better. So we're not taking it personally. It may still be uncomfortable to hear the feedback because you want whatever you're doing to be right and to be good, but we know that we're not attacking each other. Everything that we're doing, even in the tense moments, is about making things better.
And I've really grown to love the negative feedback. Like, there are times where I would just, every roast I did was, once again, quote unquote, so good or the best or delicious. And I'm like, okay, I need some negativity in here so I can improve. Like, and Chris was really one that like not didn't bring the negativity, but he was just honest. He was like, hey, let's tweak this, let's do this. And that's how I learned when I was first starting roasting. And I really appreciated that. And I remember at Handsome I sent coffee to Hart, and I really looked up to Hart at the time, and they gave me some really honest feedback, and then I cupped it and I was like, dang it. It is underdeveloped. Like, they're right. And I couldn't see through my own ego of I'm doing everything right. And so I appreciate the honesty, and we don't take it personally. We leave it at the door.
You're both experienced coffee professionals. Was there ever a path that led you away from coffee? It's from the sounds of it, you both got your start relatively young, so I'm not making any assumptions there. But you know, I'm in my 40s, my early 40s, so I feel like I've had like 6 careers at this point. Was there ever a chance that you guys would have left coffee and gone a different direction, or was this always once you kind of got into it, this was it?
Well, I think I just turned 47, and so I've had several careers myself. And in my early days, I was sort of a home coffee nerd, like, you know, looking at home barista and like learning about stuff and learning proper brewing technique. And I went to school to be a recording engineer. And as an illustration, in music business class, because we had to take music business, at the end of that class cycle, we had to do a presentation on anything we wanted to do related to music business. It was a wide open. So my presentation was teaching everyone how to brew a proper cup of coffee, because everyone that left that school, that's what they were going to be doing when they got to a studio, was making coffee for everybody. It was a huge hit, but I sort of should have known at that point. But I went on to, you know, work in recording for a little while and started in LA, and then I moved to New York and I was working in a studio, and it was just a miserable time for me and for various reasons. And so I stopped. I was having lunch with a friend who I knew from LA who happened to move to New York, and I was like, I have to leave this. I can't do this anymore, and I have to leave New York because I can't afford it. And she's like, I can get you a job at the restaurant I work at. Okay. And that's actually where I started making coffee, or I should say, having an opportunity to make coffee. They had an espresso machine. They kept, you know, 5-pound bags of whole bean in the walk-in refrigerator. And, you know, we're not talking about high-end spot, but I did my best, and it gave me the opportunity to play with coffee. And that was sort of it after that. And the only time I left coffee was after I sold Handsome. and I didn't really leave it. I just didn't go right back into it. And now I'm back.
For me, I went once I Stumptown had some Stumptown coffee. I was like, oh, this is it. And then I was gonna leave coffee after Intelligentsia and Coffee Bar. I called Chris. I think I texted Chris actually. He was like, "Hey, I'm a free agent." He's like, "Let's go to lunch." He said I wanted to be a roaster. If he had said no, then I wouldn't be. I was at that point 100% done with being front of house. Like I didn't want to be. I didn't want to talk to people, really, to be totally honest. I wanted to hide in a room but still have. There's creativity to coffee that I love, and I find more creativity in roasting and cupping and green and all that stuff. And I just want to do it alone with a couple of other people. And yeah, if you would have said no, I doubt I would be. I highly doubt I would be in coffee right now. And that changed everything. Getting a roasting opportunity.
What do you mean by creativity? How would you expound on that as far as like what you're doing now and your kind of philosophy towards roasting? How do you infuse creativity into that? I mean, we mentioned earlier kind of the production aspect of it. Um, where does that come from for you?
My main thing with creativity is creating the blends. It's my favorite thing to do, especially once you're in a place size wise to really play around and get creative. I think there's also creativity in green buying, which Chris does, and somehow pretty much entirely for the last 12 years we see incredibly eye to eye on green buying. But there's creativity like dialing in your lines, like to making the coffee taste good. It's super fun for me to roast a new coffee, and it's really the Honduras. We have a Honduras that Chris and I are really proud of, and it's like the most fun I've ever had roasting every time. Like it's all the creativity that led up to me choosing to do that line is very like rewarding. I don't know. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but I explained it.
Yeah.
So there's that.
I think, I want to add, like, I think for roasting, outside of actual roast defect, you can bake a coffee, you can underdevelop a coffee. Those things do exist. But outside of that, for me, my philosophy is that how you roast the coffee is your creative choice. It's your personal stylistic choice. I try to move away from the sort of right or wrong dogma of like you should roast light or you should roast dark or whatever. I buy the coffees that I think are delicious on the cupping table, and we together come up with the roast profiles that we think make those coffees taste delicious. And then Doug consistently hits those profiles, keeping those coffees delicious. So I think, and the team is just us. So when you taste that coffee, you are tasting our creative choices. We don't have, a team of 5 green buyers and, 10 to 15 roasters and, facilities in multiple parts of the country. You're tasting the job that we do, for better or worse, the mistakes that we make and the triumphs that we have. So I think that's how it's creative in terms of roasting. But I've long said that coffee as a career, there is a position somewhere in there for every personality type. If you're the extrovert, rock star, center of attention person, being a barista is so fun. And you get the community and the instant gratification of your customers who love you, and you get to do that every day. And there's little things like whatever designing. If you're artistic visually, you can design menus and graphic design for labels, and like there's just an avenue. If you're the sort of more science minded, there's roasting and quality control and numbers. You can find everything within the industry that works for you. You don't have to be a barista. Now, I know that sometimes making those moves can be difficult because there are only so many roaster positions, but there are opportunities for you to express yourself and express your creativity.
you mentioned earlier that you started this company kind of in the middle of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering how that impacted your choices. If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, you do not have like an operating cafe. You do pop-ups and events and that sort of customer engagement. Was that a reaction to the pandemic, or was that just the idea that we wanted to be a roaster first and then what comes comes?
I think both, if I'm honest. I mean, we started it knowing that we already had roasting infrastructure going, so it wasn't a sort of easy thing to do to start with roasted coffee. But also because of the pandemic and because building a cafe is expensive, the overhead is crazy. We wanted to just move it slowly, and the pandemic sort of forced us to move slowly because in the early days it's not like you could go out and get sales. Like we just sort of started slowly and did some online stuff and told our friends in the industry that we were doing something, and so there's just a few out there at the moment. I think for Right Quick, the goal is to have our own retail cafe operations, but again, we're not sort of steamrolling toward that. We're trying to move slowly and grow comfortably and not strain everything so that it breaks.
Yeah, I think Chris and I have a lot of past experiences with put the pedal to the floor, and we're old now. um, like, and it just like you get burnt out. So we're definitely ramping up these last 4 or 5 months, really.
Yeah.
But we took it really, really slow at the beginning and trying to get everything right and just grow comfortably and not, you know, we want to grow. Somebody's like, hey, we're gonna order 5,000 pounds a week. We're gonna be like, okay, but we had to get to a place to be comfortable with doing that, and we're there now. I think we're roasting good coffee. Like I think our branding is getting to where we want it, and we're we hit Coffee Fest. We kind of thought of Coffee Fest as our real launch. Coffee Fest LA. We weren't really announcing to people to Los Angeles before that. We just had our Instagram, just mostly our friends.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so how long, when was Coffee Fest? 2 months ago? So yeah, I guess it's really been like 2 months since we've.
Yeah, I think that I agree. I think that was our official sort of, coming out party, so to speak. It's we're here now, and so we'll see how it goes.
I think that was a lot of people's coming out party. It was certainly my first time going out to like a big event in a long,
Oh,
long
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was certainly the start of something. I wonder for you two how being entrepreneurs kind of impacts the rest of your life. It takes a certain personality to be willing to take on the risk of it. Obviously, you guys are working through this slow and you have a partnership, which I'm becoming more and more envious of as we talk here. How does being somebody who has their own business or who is kind of working on their own timeline, where if your work doesn't get done, that's really only on you, there's nobody looking over your shoulder, or if you're not successful, that's also on you, how does that impact the rest of your life in a positive or a negative way, or just neither, neutral?
I think at this point I have a different approach than when we did Handsome. It was Handsome was bigger, had far more eyeballs. We were in every publication, and there were great moments, but it was sort of there was always a little bit of stress, just sort of always lingering, and sometimes a lot of stress. But there was never this like moment to breathe. And that's not to say that I didn't love a lot of what happened with that. And LA loved it. We still get people like, "Oh man, I loved Handsome," like still. But this is different. I guess I don't know if it's I'm different or the scenario's different or both, probably both. But we're taking a much more relaxed approach in a sort of healthy, or what I think is a healthy approach to it and not letting it overtake our lives, certainly our personal lives. We're good at leaving it at work. Yes, it all falls on us. There's no backup employees. There's no way to call in sick or any of that. Like, just has to happen. But we're pretty good about, well, we're going to deal with that problem tomorrow. Tonight, I'm going to have dinner with my wife and like do whatever. Like I just,
Yeah, I think I've always been pretty good at, like, when I'm at work, and I'm giving it everything I have. Sometimes to the detriment of myself, and then when I'm at home, kind of a work hard, play hard situation. But I'm just not like, I'm leaving it, and it is a little bit harder to do that in like this partnership we have with Las Lilas and Right Quick, because it, I do get, more phone calls and texts and Slack at all times, but it's more fun. So I don't think, I'm like, this is cool. I had an emergency order yesterday after I was done roasting and already home. And I was like, hey, Chris, this is happening. I'll let you know. Hey, Chris, I took care of it. Like, and it that used to like really piss me off. Like, why didn't you order on time? And now I'm just like, who cares? Like, let's take care of it and move on. We got to take care of it anyway. Like, so,
right.
So who cares?
And, on the receiving end of that text, I'm like, okay. And then I know that if we need to go in and roast, well, I'll go in and roast with, we'll pack it up. We'll make it happen. We'll deliver it. We'll get it there. But I'm not going to worry about it until Doug's like, we got to go in and roast. Like, okay, well, here we go. Otherwise, I'm just going to go back about my day, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He's got it handled or I've got it handled. We're not going to fight about it and worry about it.
Sure. I like that there are emergency coffee orders. That to me is just amazing. That's a very
more often than you would think.
Pretty frequently.
Like somebody just panics and realizes we are out of coffee and we need it now. I don't want to lose this before we hit the ceiling on our time today, but you are based in LA. How does LA impact what you do with your coffee company, and how do you think Right Quick represents Los Angeles? I think Los Angeles, and I'll just kind of espouse a little commentary, but I wouldn't have known Los Angeles was such an incredible coffee community coming from the Midwest or the East Coast. But it's almost kind of like, it's like, I think one of the few things Los Angeles does quietly is every single neighborhood seems to have this fantastic coffee roaster or coffee shop. How do you find that reflects in what you do and how you feel about representing LA?
I thought about this earlier when you were talking about East Coast, West Coast. And I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and Seattle and Portland have these long, storied coffee histories and pretty big coffee egos. And that's what I grew up with, And then when I moved to LA in January 2010, it was like coffee was just starting here. Mm-hmm. Like, and so it had this like freedom that I found at Intelligentsia. Like, we can do whatever we want that's good. You're not pigeonholed like Seattle is. No, I love Seattle. No offense to coffee up there, but it's this narrow, it feels very narrow and like kind of lonely, like you guys were talking about earlier. And in LA, because it was a little bit late, there was a freedom and anybody could kind of do anything they wanted that tasted good. And it exploded really fast. Like, I credit Intelligentsia big time for just completely changing the scene here in LA. And because it's LA, people saw it and went, that's awesome. I'm going to do it too. And some struck gold and some failed or burned out, but it just kept building and building and building. And I've never stopped wanting to be a part of that in LA, of that kind of creativity again, of being able to do a good thing, make coffee taste good, and kind of not care about anything else. Just make it taste good.
Yeah, I think for me, right quick. So when I was formulating the idea for this brand, I wanted to infuse myself in it without it being a caricature or, you know, overly sentimental or something. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. Then I moved to Tucson, Arizona, and then I moved to LA. Essentially, there are a few other places that I mentioned before, but most of my life has been the sort of Southwest, and so the name Right Quick is a saying that is very common in Texas, right? It's just can I borrow your truck right quick? I need to run to the store. And I just liked that subtle homage, but I also like that it has a meaning, like things are going to be done right and they're going to be done quickly. Sort of thinking forward to that future cafe or something like that. And then the sort of brand identity is built around the color palette and the idea of Southwest sunsets, the sunsets that happen in Los Angeles and in the desert of Arizona, things like that. Just things that are part of me that I think are beautiful and important and formative of who I am without it being, Johnny Rocket's 50s nostalgia nonsense. Like I wanted to put myself in it in a way that was meaningful, but not beat you over the head with it. And sort of imbue it with that sort of Southwest and specifically Southern California creative energy, but laid back, I'm cool with it attitude. Like it's all good. And so that's sort of what it means to me. Like Houston and Los Angeles are probably the two most important cities in my life. And I wanted to have them both in the brand somehow.
The Southern California kind of it's all good, laid back vibe is deceptive to people outside of Southern California because they think that's all it is. And yet underneath that attitude is this incredible, innovative, like excitement and energy towards creating new businesses and new products, which I think is having been here now for, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, whatever it's been, it is just, I'm always just amazed that like it's not what I expected growing up as a kid somewhere else in the world. Is there anything else today that we didn't cover that you guys want people to know about Right Quick or about yourselves?
I think one thing is just like if you have questions for us or for me specifically, just send them Instagram or whatever. If you want to talk, like let's talk. I that's one place I've gotten into in my coffee career where like if you want help roasting or guidance or thoughts, whatever, reach out. Like
Yeah.
I don't have ego about that sort of stuff. I want to help. Like Chris helped me or like everybody in Intelligentsia that trained me, like kind of paying that back sort of a deal. If you want to come in and roast with me, like I can't give you any money, but like I'll tell you what I'm doing. I don't care. Like,
Yeah. We as part of what we wanted to do or what we want to do at Right Quick is create avenues and open doors for people, particularly people that don't always get doors open for them. There's a lot of people in the industry that look like us, and
yes.
I think that needs to change a little bit. And I think it is, but I think if we can do our part to help future roasters or have barista training, whatever it is, whatever you're interested in, let us know because there's probably a way we can help you learn. And like Doug said, that we can't hire anyone at the moment, but we're happy to let you come and watch us and ask questions and whatever.
We'll give you some coffee.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Chances are you'll get a bag of coffee out of it.
Okay, well, it's either a 2 to 6 hour drive depending on traffic, so I'll see you soon.
You're right. Yeah, exactly.
I always close out with asking, when you guys are out in the world and you're getting a cup of coffee somewhere else, what do you guys order?
Oh, that's actually, I know what you order.
Yeah, I don't deviate. I basically drink espresso and black coffee. I have an espresso and a black coffee at least once a day. I mean, I have my own setup at home, so every morning I make a cappuccino for my wife and an espresso for myself, and then we have filtered coffee along with that. And when I go out, it's most often black coffee, and depending on the shop I'm at, I might also do an espresso. I will do a personal rant for myself, just purely for me. I don't love natural processed coffees. I don't love to consume natural processed coffees. I don't want to, get into an argument about naturals and where they sit in the world of coffee, but I don't love to consume them. And so I don't like when a shop has them on espresso, but it is not noted that it's a natural. I do not like the surprise natural espresso. That's just my personal thing. Just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. If I'm checking out a shop, I agree with Chris about the naturals though. Like, just let me know. If I'm checking out a shop, it's an espresso and a drip. Almost consistently, I just get a drip. That's my by far favorite way to drink coffee. It's not even close. But, I love a little like cortado too, depending on the shop and my trust level in said shop. I'll probably get a cortado. But yeah, a drip, just classic, easy. And when it's good, it's so good.
True.
I really appreciate both of you taking time to be on the show with me and share part of this part of your journey, coffee journey with us. And I'm looking forward to trying more right quick. I had some of your coffee from Coffee Fest and really enjoyed it. And just thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
this was
thank you.
Super fun.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, to recap. Both Chris and Doug admittedly say quote-unquote a lot. They also both took distinct paths through coffee until meeting at Intelligentsia in Pasadena in 2010. For a time, Intelligentsia was one of the names in third wave craft coffee. They inspired a generation of coffee shops that came up very quickly behind them. They were so successful that a majority of Intelligentsia was purchased by the German-based JAB Holding Company, which was big coffee news. They also own a majority of Pete's Coffee, Caribou Coffee, Stumptown, Keurig Green Mountain, and even Krispy Kreme. But I digress. The point being that Christopher and Doug were on the forefront of a quickly growing wave of coffee, both of whom were seeking more and more answers for their coffee questions. Their paths diverged for a while before coming back together at Handsome Coffee. They diverged again before coming back together once again to roast under the Los Lilas banner and now Right Quick Roasters. Part of their partnership involves being willing to share and, in Doug's words, be vulnerable. They also need to check in on one another to make sure that they're both on the same page. Sometimes honesty can be uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it personal. They're working together in service of the coffee, and to ensure that they are ready to grow when the opportunity arises. When it does, you can be sure that the coffee they put out will be a reflection of their creative choices. Finally, if you find yourself in need of a coffee mentor or have a question about coffee, maybe reach out to Christopher and Doug. They are open to share what they've learned and pay forward all the experience they've gleaned over the years. I'm going to share more about Right Quick Roasters, business partnerships, and some not-from-the-show coffee content in the Roast West Coast Coffee newsletter, which can be found on roastwestcoast.com. And of course, don't forget to head to rightquick.la to order that Honduras roast while you can, and follow at rightquickcoffee on Instagram to stay on top of what they're roasting today, where they can be found, and occasionally how the dogs feel about the whole operation. Now on to our closing business. Did you know that this podcast is a listener and reader-supported creative effort? It's true. There are a bunch of crazy cool people who subscribe to the paid version of the newsletter at roastwestcoast.com. You're probably getting sick of hearing that URL. If you've been enjoying this episode or the 120 some that came before it, please consider subscribing. The podcast is always free, but damn if I don't appreciate the support. That comes every time a new name shows up on that subscriber roll. Thank you to everyone on that list. I also have a few key coffee industry partners who I depend on for expertise and a bit of financial support. That said, I've been lucky enough to only partner with brands I really believe in and feel good telling you to support. You can find links to those partners in the show notes, in each newsletter post, and even right on the front page of roastwestcoast.com. So a special shout out to Cafe Laterre, Moster Coffee Company, Camp Coffee Company, Coffee Cycle Roasting, Ignite Coffee Company, Maria Coffee Company, Cape Horn Coffee Importers, Ascend Coffee Roasters, and Steady State Coffee Roasting, who also have their own monthly newsletter, which you should definitely follow. I'll link to that in the newsletter. Coffee Cycle Roasting is in the Pacific Beach neighborhood of San Diego, and this Sunday they're hosting a local makers market. I hope to see you there. I'll be the one giving out free stickers. Thank you all for listening and supporting this show. This episode of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast has been written, produced, and recorded by me, Ryan Wolt. I hope this episode has found you happy, healthy, and with at least enough sanity to make it through the day. Always tip your baristas, and be sure to drink good coffee.